On a mist-shrouded battlefield, a drama unfolded where every detail seemed to pulse with tension and the foreboding of impending events. The invaders, whose weapons were forged in distant lands, lined up in formidable ranks, ready to descend upon the defenders. To meet them rose the Vikings, men and women whose courage seemed inexhaustible, their shields forming an impenetrable wall as if grown from the very earth they had sworn to protect. The Vikings' resistance intensified with every step the invaders took, each clash of their blades a declaration of their unwavering resolve. The land, the arena of this conflict, held secrets even for its defenders, and dense forests and treacherous mountains seemed to come alive in unison with the Vikings. Warriors spoke of the wind's whispers, of unseen guides leading them to inaccessible heights. It seemed nature itself recognized them as its true guardians. For the invaders, the landscape became a sinister labyrinth, while for the Vikings, it was a strategic ally. Just as victory seemed to favor the enemy, the Vikings set an ambush worthy of legends. Using their intimate knowledge of every corner of the terrain, they lured their foes into a narrow valley, where a hail of arrows rained down upon them, and hand-to-hand combat knew no mercy. This triumph was more than just a military victory. It was a testament to the Vikings' unbreakable bond with this mysterious land. The song of victory echoed through the mountains, foreshadowing many other stories that would be written about the mastery of this uncharted territory. Harold, the Shield of Dawn, gazed into the distance, his eyes piercing the fog that concealed the enemy army. His golden hair and imposing figure instilled confidence even in the most fearless warriors. Harold was more than just a leader. He was the embodiment of the Viking spirit. Opposite him stood Alaric of Ardens, the stern leader of the Christian forces, whose unwavering faith was rivaled only by his ambition. Alaric, known as the Flame of the Cross, struck terror into his enemies and inspired his followers. The battle, destined to last 7 days, became known as the War of the 17th, named after the jagged cliffs surrounding the battlefield. Harold understood that relying solely on brute force would not be enough. Using his knowledge of the terrain, he divided his forces into small units for nocturnal ambushes and diversions. Alaric, in turn, with impeccable organization, built fortified camps and used battering rams to breach natural barriers. On the second day, Harold's tactics began to bear fruit. His warriors, camouflaged with moss and foliage, blended into the landscape. At night, they infiltrated Alaric's camp, setting fire to supplies and sowing chaos among the Christian soldiers. Alaric, without losing his composure, adapted his strategy, sending scouts to survey the terrain and predict Viking movements. Both leaders played a complex game on the chessboard of war, but the question was who truly controlled that board. The land, it seemed, had chosen a side, yet its allegiance remained a mystery. Harold was more than just a warrior. He was a symbol of hope for his people. Born in a small village by a fjord, he grew up on his grandmother's tales of ancient gods and legendary heroes. In his youth, he led his first raid, astonishing even the most seasoned warriors with his ability to navigate the terrain and make swift decisions. But Harold did not merely seek glory in battle. Each conquest was for him promise of a better future for his tribe, an opportunity to expand arable lands and secure resources for future generations. Despite his strength, he carried a deep pain. His younger sister had been abducted and sold into slavery during a Christian raid years ago, an event that fueled his anger and distrust of the invaders. Alaric of Ardens, on the other hand, was the son of a noble family from a distant land, yet his path to power was not strewn with roses. After the tragic death of his parents, he was raised in a monastery, where he quickly realized that discipline and faith could conquer the impossible. He was charismatic and methodical, a man who could wield both words and swords to shape destiny. Although he claimed his mission was to carry the light of the cross, Alaric was an ambitious strategist who saw the conquest of this uncharted land as a chance to immortalize his name in history. Yet, deep down, Alaric was a man plagued by doubts. He understood that his soldiers followed him more out of necessity than loyalty, and feared that any misstep could undermine his leadership. Both leaders were reflections of their peoples, yet each wrestled with their own inner demons. Harold, beloved by his warriors, felt constant pressure. He had to lead them not only with strength but also with wisdom, knowing that the slightest error could lead to his people's demise. Alaric, even while bearing the banner of the cross, questioned whether he wielded his faith as a weapon or a shield. In every decision they made, not only the fate of the battle, but also the legacy they would leave behind hung in the balance. The land, a silent witness to their actions, seemed to watch and wait to see who would prove worthy of its dominion. The unknown land, which the Vikings named Vodam, was a realm of contrasts. Grand mountain ranges rose like sentinels in the north. Picturesque valleys were lush with vibrant greenery, and at the heart of the land lay a bottomless lake, whose dark waters seemed to hold echoes of ancient mysteries. For the Norse seafarers, Vodam was more than just a territory to protect. It was a promise of prosperity, a land where their descendants could grow up free under the open sky. For the Christian commander Alaric, conversely, Vodam represented a strategically vital region, a key piece on the chessboard of his conquest ambitions. On the third day of the War of the 17th, the conflict escalated to unprecedented brutality, its echoes destined to be forever etched in folk tales. Harold, skillfully leveraging his knowledge of the jagged cliffs that gave the battle its name, positioned his best archers on the heights, giving them a wide view of the valley. Simultaneously, units of warriors armed with battle axes lay hidden in the dense forest. When Alaric sent the first wave of his soldiers across the valley, believing it safe, they were met by a volley of arrows that instantly turned the advance into chaos. However, the Christians were not about to retreat. Alaric personally led a second assault, shielding his men as they pressed against the defenders. The scales of battle seemed to tip back and forth until, on the fifth day, Harold made a move that drastically altered the course of the engagement. Under the cover of night, he dispatched a group of scouts to divert the course of the river flowing through the territory. With the arrival of dawn, the invaders discovered their supplies buried in mud, and the movement of wagons and artillery became impossible. Alaric, realizing the gravity of the situation, swiftly adjusted his tactics, ordering his soldiers to construct makeshift bridges and burn sections of the forest to clear their path. Yet the very land seemed to rise against him. The fog that thickened with the evening made communication between his troops difficult, and the Vikings skillfully exploited this confusion for swift and devastating attacks. By dawn on the sixth day, Vodam appeared as a living entity, breathing the conflict that consumed it. The air hung thick with the scent of smoke and iron, and the sounds of cries and drum beats echoed through the surrounding cliffs. Harold gathered his warriors in a circle by the great lake, where the dark waters reflected the torchlight. "Today we fight not just for Vodam," he proclaimed in a voice as firm as ice. "We fight for our children, for our history, for our gods. This land has chosen us, and no one will take it." His people responded with a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very ground. Meanwhile, in the Christian camp, Alaric of Ardens surveyed his troops. Weariness was etched on his soldiers' faces, but he knew retreat was impossible. "Victory does not belong to those who fear the darkness," he declared, raising the banner emblazoned with the cross. "It belongs to those who pass through it with courage and faith." He divided his forces into three groups, betting on a triple assault, a direct advance through the Central Valley, a push into the southern forest, and a daring attempt to cross the lake on makeshift rafts. The strategy was risky, but Alaric knew he had no time for hesitation. The decisive clash began at midday as pale sunbeams barely pierced the veil of fog. The Christian forces advancing through the valley were met with a hail of stones meticulously prepared by the Vikings during the night. The cliffs, which had served as their cover, transformed into deadly weapons, and the invaders were forced to retreat, leaving the battlefield strewn with shattered shields and the bodies of the wounded. To the south, in the forest, the advance progressed more successfully, but as Alaric's soldiers began to fell trees to clear their path, they realized too late they had walked into a trap. Harold had concealed his warriors in the treetops, from where they descended like shadows upon the enemy with axes and spears. However, the most dramatic confrontation occurred on the lake. Alaric's rafts began to cross the watery expanse under the cover of fog, while the Vikings silently watched them. When the first Christian boats reached the middle of the lake, Harold gave the signal. Small Viking longboats, hidden along the shores, suddenly emerged from the water like awakened sea serpents. Armed with harpoons and torches, the Vikings attacked the rafts, setting them ablaze and sending them to the bottom one by one. The dark waters of the lake became a graveyard, where Alaric's soldiers desperately tried to swim to shore, weighed down by their heavy armor. The day ended with both sides utterly exhausted, but the Vikings' morale was clearly superior. They had repelled all attacks, skillfully employing the terrain's features, cunning, and their inherent ferocity. As he prepared for another night watch, Harold knew that Alaric was not one to easily surrender. On the horizon, Christian torches burned like unblinking eyes, silently foreshadowing that the seventh day would be the bloodiest of all. The seventh day dawned, much like the previous ones, yet the air was imbued with a different sensation. A thick and oppressive fog seemed to envelop every corner of Vodam, as if the very earth held its breath in silent anticipation. The coming battle would be unlike the others. Everyone understood that both Harold and Alaric were preparing their forces for the coming night from their respective positions. This would no longer be a battle of strategies or attrition. The outcome of this final clash, this ultimate dance of steel and courage, would depend on only one factor: sheer force of will. A crimson sunset, like spilled blood, slowly stained the horizon. The Viking warriors, frozen, turned their gazes skyward as if awaiting a sign. And then, as if by an unseen hand, an icy wind swept across the field, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. It seemed the ancient gods themselves were descending to bless them. Harold, looking up at the stars, whispered to his comrades, "Today, the sun will not set for us. We will fight shoulder to shoulder with our ancestors." In the Christian camp, Alaric was no longer the invincible warrior he had appeared to be at the start of the battles. Weariness was etched in his eyes, and his heart was wounded by bitter losses. He understood that with nightfall, there would be no room for retreat or cunning schemes. He had staked everything on this final, desperate assault, and now only the strongest would survive. In his mind, he offered prayers for strength, but somewhere deep down, he knew that victory would come not from faith, but from the might of his army. As the moon rose, illuminating the front line, Harold gave the signal. With a wild, primal roar, the Vikings surged forward, as if the very wrath of the gods had possessed them. The night promised to be swift and merciless, like a storm. The Christians, stunned by the sudden attack, tried to form ranks, but the Vikings crashed into them like an unstoppable wave, sweeping everything in their path. Blades sliced through the air, the deafening clang of metal resounded everywhere, and the earth was stained with the blood of the fallen, victims of this brutal clash. The final battle lasted no more than an hour, yet it became a veritable sea of blood. When the last blow fell, the earth seemed to exhale in relief, and the ensuing silence was ringing and all-encompassing. Exhausted but triumphant, the Vikings raised their weapons to the sky, thanking the gods and the land for the victory granted. The land, reclaimed at such a cost, now belonged to them And peace, if only for a short while, reigned over Vodam. Alaric lay on the ground, his strength ebbing away. Ultimately, it was the power of the land and the ancient gods that ensured the Vikings' triumph, not the faith of a man who failed to grasp nature's true might. The Battle of the 17th, as it was named by the people, was immortalized in Viking sagas as a triumph whose echoes would reverberate through the ages. Vodam, now under Norse rule, would become a symbol of unyielding resilience and courage, a lasting reminder that the Vikings, united by a common purpose, were invincible. Alaric's Christians, defeated but not broken in spirit, retreated to their own lands, vowing to return someday. But with Harold's victory, the hope for a new future grew more tangible with each passing day. Surveying his warriors, weary but with burning hearts, Harold realized that Vodam was now an extension of his strength and will. The gods, as promised, had bestowed their blessing, but the true victory had been forged by the immeasurable bravery of his people. Harold understood that this battle was merely the beginning of a new chapter in Viking history. But for now, what mattered most was the land that now belonged to his people. The echo of victory cries faded into the mountaintops, and the first rays of sun illuminated the hills of Vodam, heralding the dawn of a new era. Harold, immortalized in the memory of his land and his people, prepared for new endeavors. Vodam was safe, but the future held many mysteries that he and his warriors would have to unravel. The story of his people would continue, but as he gazed at the horizon, he knew that true strength lay in the spirit and unity of his people.